Our last but not the least presentation for this panel will be given by Dr. Clifford Saron. Dr. Saron, where's Dr. Saron? Oh, okay, there you are. Dr. Saron is an associate research scientist in the Center for Mind and Brain at UC Davis. He's a pioneer of meditation scientific research. His main project involves a large-scale collaborative and multi-method longitudinal investigation of the effects of intensive meditation training known as the Shamatha project. I hope I pronounced that correctly. His other research work concerns sensory processing, multisensory integration, and interhemispheric communication in children with autism spectrum disorders. And the title of his talk today is from personal experience to longitudinal. Oh, I just realized I skipped a half. Okay, good, great. Okay, let's welcome Dr. Saron.
Okay. How do we switch? Is this, oh, okay. So it's really an honor to be at this inaugural symposium, and I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to present, and I'm also very grateful for Ron Mangan's inherent preternatural interdisciplinary bent. I was employee number 1 after him at the Center for Mind and Brain, and so I see this as his next, visionary child, so I'm happy to participate. So I'm going to begin today. We were asked by Joe to consider how did we come to use the methods we use, and part of the answer to that, in my case, is an accident of history. There's somebody talking, and he's the guy on the left. That's me in 1977. And on the right is Richie Davidson. And we were colleagues at the State University of New York at Purchase, and we worked together for many years. And we had a mutual personal interest in contemplative practice. And in 1990, he was due to give a talk to the Dalai Lama. And we met at a conference, and he said, I can't go. I was going to say, well, you excited about going? He's, I can't go. My mother-in-law is sick. Would you like to go to Dharamsala? So 3 weeks later, here I am taking a picture in McLeod-Ganj, the foothills of the Himalayas. And you see, Your Holiness, on the vertical axis is alpha power. There's a talk at the 3rd Mind and Life Institute conference. Interestingly, I'm 25 years later still holding the laser pointer. One of us has aged significantly, and it isn't the Dalai Lama. But back to this remarkable, my life has not been the same since 1990 experience. I had the good fortune of sharing a room with Chileno neuroscientist Francisco Varela. And he's arguably the intellectual father of the growing dialogue between Buddhist contemplative practice and the methods of cognitive neuroscience. And so one night at 2 a.m, he said, well, we're 2 old EEGers, we should do something. We should investigate these monks who are in retreat in the mountains, in the foothills of the Himalayas, and see whether Tibetan mental training actually affects their cognitive, emotional, and perceptual capabilities. So we got together with another fellow who was part of this meeting, the translator, Buddhist teacher and scholar Alan Wallace. And here also, Alan aging. It's not only scientists that get gray. And we did a field research project, and we thought we would bring a few tools of the trade. So this actually has a few things that you don't see much anymore. Here's a roll of film. Here's a fax machine. Here is a radio telephone often used by drug runners at the time when there were no cell service. And we did an EEG demonstration at a Mind and Life conference for the Dalai Lama. He was really interested in how we calibrated the horizontal time axis of the display so we could measure the frequency of the brain waves. So we took all this equipment, and Genlam Rinpa, Alan's meditation teacher, said, "Oh, don't ask the monks to come to the lab you're building. Go to them up in the mountains." So we had brought 1,500 pounds of equipment, and we had to just put what we could put in a few backpacks and go up to them. So we visited monks. Here are goat trails, and they lived in reclusive stone huts, the local flora and fauna. And inside these stone huts with tin roofs, we met some remarkable individuals. Here's a man who, you've talked to monks and you say, well, we'd like to do some experiments about the effects of meditation on the mind. And they would say, you want to do an experiment? Just meditate. And they would say, mind? The mind is the space in which mental phenomena arise. It's odorless, colorless, tasteless. How are you going to measure that? So we eventually sort of said, well, maybe you can focus on an object for a few seconds, because mainly experiments show that most people can't do even that. I said, oh, that's nothing. Why are you interested? It's trivial. But why are you asking me? I don't know anything. And so very few people talked about their meditative practice, because that's generally culturally not done. But this monk was different. He spoke about the quality of his mind as very changeable, and the set of tools that he employed to modulate when he felt overexcited, how he calmed himself down, when he felt despairing, how he brought himself back. He seemed to have a very rich toolkit that, as Allison talked about, would help in unhinging the stickiness of negativity. He had been tortured by the Chinese. His hearing aid is what you see in his hands. He couldn't hear well. He'd been persecuted as a child because somebody hit him on the head and he had a deformed skull, which in Tibetan culture was regarded as a sign of a very evil past life. So he had suffered an enormous amount. And through that suffering, he had developed a kind of skill of dispassionately working with the qualities of his mind. In some sense, you could say, in praise of neutrality. Here's a monk doing a Posner covert attention orientation task. It's very interesting cross-culturally to try to do this work, because as Ron and many others can tell you, when you do this kind of experiment with undergraduates, you have a cue that's going to tell you where a stimulus comes. And sometimes you put the stimulus opposite to where the cue tells you it's going to come. We call that a catch trial, and undergraduates typically take it in stride. He said, "Why did you lie?" We also looked at emotional responses to difficult to watch films. We showed films of the Chinese beating Tibetan monks in the 1987 Lhasa uprising, and images of the Dalai Lama. And you could ask, why are these monks laughing? This is at the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics in Dharamsala. Here's Francisco Varela, and we've had the temerity and naivete to put a cap on the head when everyone knows the mind is here. complex cross-cultural issues. You can read about those in that book. Finally, we met this man. We asked him, what's the relationship between sadness and compassion? Because compassion kind of means with pathos, right? So often we're moved by the suffering of others, and we feel sad or despairing. And he said, well, sadness can catalyze compassion. But compassion, the genuine wish to be of benefit and wish for the relief of suffering of another, that's not sad at all. He said, simultaneously you need to have your heart break and find unbearable the suffering of another, and you have to love the conditions that gave rise to that suffering almost as a mother would love her child, so that you can penetrate into the causes and conditions that gave rise to the present moment. This was a kind of life-changing afternoon. And he said, no thank you to any of our tests, but that was enough. But we asked, these are extraordinary folks. Most people who go through the Tibetan monastic training do not go into retreat in the foothills of the Himalayas and these Neolithic stone huts. So maybe they were extraordinary to begin with. So we need to do a longitudinal study to find out. So in terms of meditation research, there are sort of two big questions. And historically, the first question has been, what do people do when they meditate? We have 50, 60 years of research of slapping a bunch of electrodes on meditators and looking at their brain activity with the idea that there is some kind of special or privileged physiological state that occurs during meditation. But there are tremendous problems with this, trying to answer this question. Individuals differ in their motivation and attitude toward what they're going to practice. They differ in how they understand the meditation instructions. They differ in how they implement those instructions, aside from the fact that there are many, many different contemplative and meditative techniques. And they differ in what they learn from their meditative practice and when they learn it. And there are also these physiological changes from the direct behavioral intervention of the quiescence engaged in conducting the practice of meditation. I didn't think that you would have heard today already this word, but this will be the second time we hear tuchis. We call this the tuchis effect. Can anybody recall when you first heard the tuchis, the word tuchis? So this perception is reality. I was primed for this. Where? In the NASCAR video. That's right. It's Yiddish for your bottom. But there is a question that we really can get a fair amount of mileage from using scientific methods, and that is, what do people do differently because they've meditated? Here we can use experimental approaches to evaluate the effects of training. We can look before and after and compare to an appropriate control group. But what and how to measure? What is the outcome that we're looking for? This is a kind of pervasive intervention. One outcome might well be the stickiness of negative thinking. Other outcomes might be compassionate behavior in the world. Other outcomes could be relating to sustained attention or psychological well-being. So these gains, we don't have always established laboratory and self-report measures, so we need a multidisciplinary approach, and of course these questions interact. So what did we do? What is this project that I'm alluding to? Alan Wallace, that translator from early in 1990, taught 2 3-month full-time retreats. Now, most psychological interventions, Jorge talked about ecological validity. gamers game for 20 hours a week sometimes, or sometimes they go on continuous, sleepless, jags of gaming, and he's doing 15 minutes in a laboratory. Well, we wanted to do, with respect to meditative practice, an intervention that was intense. It's 7 days a week, about 6 to 8 hours a day of meditation for 3 months. It's about a 900-hour assessment. The primary training emphasis was on cultivating relaxation, a sense of stability of attention, and perceptual clarity. The most common meditative technique was simply paying attention to the tactile sensations of your breath, and when you notice your mind wandering, gently bringing your mind back to the central focus, and doing that again and again and again with a sense of stability, relaxation, and paying very close attention. Paying very close attention actually constituted a second axis. You had to find the object, come back to that object, but you also had to evaluate in an ongoing kind of metacognitive way, well, what's the quality of my attention right now? Is it lax? Am I kind of fuzzy? Or am I excited? Am I overexuberant? Do I begin to have thoughts that, I'm doing it really well? Now you bring your mind back to the object. So you have a two axis, on or off object, and what's the quality of your attention. But you can really focus your attention and be completely divorced from the ethical context of the practice. The terrorists on 9/11 were highly focused, but their ethical frame was deeply problematic. The traditional analogy is that of the sniper. So you have to also cultivate key attitudes. And as Allison was talking about, in terms of generating gratitude as an antidote to this sort of stickiness of negative input, every day people practiced loving kindness, meditation, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. Not every day for all four, but they were moved through as guided meditations and then incorporated for about 45 minutes a day. Loving kindness, the intention for others to be happy and achieve the causes of happiness. Compassion, I've spoken about. Empathetic joy. You didn't put up on your slide how you feel when someone else gets a paper accepted or a grant funded. Academics is not a hotbed of empathetic joy all the time. And a sense of equanimity, those close and far, really deserving of these benefits. So in this project, we've done follow-up testing at 5 months, a year and a half, and 6 to 7 years. And our goals are, sort of obvious. Can focused attention meditation actually train attention? Can training in loving kindness and compassion improve emotion regulation? Are improvements in attention related to psychological function? And what are the physiological changes that accompany these results? So we have experience questionnaires on a daily basis, pre-post battery of self-report questionnaires, structured interviews, attention-related tasks, attention, emotion, interaction tasks, emotion-related tasks I'll talk to you about, and looking at physiology during meditation. We'll see if I can squeeze in the next few minutes 2 data sets. We have EEG measures, autonomic measures, startle responses, performance on cognitive tasks, facial expressions of emotion, scores on validated questionnaires, network analysis of thematic interview content, biomarkers of stress affiliation and cellular aging. This is kind of like a major motion picture. This is our team. It's not all of our, we also have, I want to acknowledge, give a shout out to the many, many undergrad RAs, a number of whom are in the audience with us today. So this is graduate students, postdocs, full-time RAs, investigators and faculty at Davis and elsewhere. It's a kind of village effort, and we have been funded now consistently since 2006. So in 2007, in Shambhala Mountain Center in the Rockies, we created a retreat, and then here's Alan teaching in the second retreat, and downstairs from that room we built some laboratories. We expect improved ability to focus, increased ability to withhold inappropriate responses, increased ability to engage with suffering, increase in prosocial tendencies. So in the first data set here, I'll show you, we made a response inhibition or continuous performance task. It's very boring. You see a long line, goes away after 1/10 of a second, and then you might see a short line. And every time you see the long line, you have to push a button. When you see a short line, you do not push a button. The short line here looks really short. However, we make it really hard. We spend 15 minutes getting everybody's visual perceptual threshold. So a short line might look more like this short line. So you have to push the button. We do this 32 minutes without a break. Every 2 seconds you get a line, and only 10% of the time is it a short line. And when it is a short line, you can only tell it's a short line about 75% of the time. Got it? Well, it turns out, we published this in Emotion, that if you combine the data from the 2 retreats, we had a group that came as a first retreat and a second retreat group. We flew to the retreat center to be a control group that was demographically matched. At the pre-retreat point, we see this decrement in the capacity to withhold this response inhibition activity, and then it improves by the midpoint and further at the end of the retreat. But what's really interesting is to the extent that people improved on this low-level cognitive behavioral measure, it predicted their self-reported improvement in adaptive psychological functioning. Less anxiety, less depression, more resilience, more openness to new experience, more mindfulness, less difficulty in emotion regulation. This is all in this Sadra paper in Emotion. So that means that something about the contemplative training is actually producing an increased capacity to withhold inappropriate responses, and that's related to psychological well-being. And that's also consistent with what you were talking about as a prescription for being less negative contagion-ing, to invent a word. We've replicated this in a recent paper. Tony Zanesco, a grad student in the lab, and colleagues did this at Spirit Rock Meditation Center in a 1-month meditation retreat, same task. So now in the remaining 2 minutes, give me an extra minute, we'll try to go through a little bit about responses to suffering. So one of the things that we hypothesize is that rather than just sort of have an aversive reaction to the encounter with suffering, this kind of training can allow one to lean into the response to suffering and not push it away. So instead of reacting to the perception of suffering with rejection emotions like anger, contempt, or disgust, one might let oneself feel what you're going to feel in terms of sadness and distress. So we look at facial expressions of emotion. I'm going to show you some graphic images coming up. This work is spearheaded by Erica Rosenberg, Tony Zanesco, and Brandon King, and finally, after many years, it's in Press in Emotion. So we're looking at an unobtrusive video recording while somebody watches a film. These are single frames from a documentary about the Iraq War. here's a soldier speaking with remorse. Then we code every single frame of video where there is a detectable muscle movement using Paul Ekman and Wally Friesen's facial action coding. One of the 46 muscle groups on the face, the moment the muscle contraction starts, when it peaks, its intensity, and when it ends. And when you do that, this is the data you can generate from just 12 seconds of facial behavior. And then you can apply those codes to an emotion dictionary. And we can ask the question empirically, did people's sadness expressions change before to after the retreat? We showed another difficult film before the retreat. And when we do that, we see that the control group does not differ from the retreat group in the probability of showing sadness expressions, nor in the number of sadness expressions. After the retreat, there's a significant increase in the probability of showing sadness in the retreat group, but if you show sadness, you don't show a different number of sadness expressions. In terms of rejection emotions, anger, contempt, and disgust, there's no significant difference between the probability of showing an expression or the number of expressions. But after the retreat, there's equal probability of showing these rejection emotions, but if you are in the retreat, you show significantly fewer rejection emotions. This suggests that one can take the visceral afferent feedback of the arising of a negative emotion and use its occurrence to help reframe your encounter with your feeling in response to the perception of suffering. To conclude, we looked at people's emotional self-reported response when we thought they were feeling sad. And it turns out that the retreatants did not report they were feeling sad when they showed sadness expressions. They reported they were feeling sympathy, not sadness. And there was no relationship between sadness expressions and sympathy in the control group. So this suggests that the sadness wasn't sad, it was about empathic concern and other directed training-related growth. And this may facilitate the arising of compassion when confronted with suffering in self and others. So with Jen Pokorny and Alex Norman in our laboratory, we're looking at changes in the meaning, the qualitative meaning, the worldview of people. And I have run out of time to explain that we're using network analysis to depict, this is open codes of important things regarding people's worldview, which we're doing longitudinally. So stay tuned for data about that. And thank you.